I'm Jay Beershank. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're here for another edition of book reviews. You're joining me here in Pan's Farm, which is near Chiang Mai, Thailand, about 30 minutes away from where me and my partner are practicing Muay Thai. My partner is filming this video. Appreciate that. It's the first time I've ever had someone film a video for me. It's exciting. Today we're going to go over a Huxley novel, and to many people's perspective, this is one of the most culturally significant novels really ever written, or at least in the past 100 years, at least from an American perspective. You hear this novel referenced so much, especially for its resemblance, people say, to the dystopian future's resemblance to where we're living right now in reality, and how it gets closer and closer to being aligned every year. And, you know, I believe in a lot of ways the significance of this novel is overhyped, but still the cultural significance alone makes this book worth reading. The book's only about 170 pages. It's an easy read. I swept through it in about a week, and you could easily sweep through it in a month. It was written in 1932, so it's almost at its century mark, and that book is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. So, in my opinion, the most important thing and the biggest reason to read this book is to ponder the question, is the society talked about in this book close and getting closer to the society and world that we live in now? And I believe the most important question to ask, and one of the most important parts in this book, is the discussion that the Savage and Bernard and Helmholtz have with the World Controller around page 150, where the World Controller really explains how the world government has structured the world and why. And what the World Controller tells them, his name is Mustafa Mond, I think that's a cool name. What the World Controller tells them is that they've had to exchange truth and beauty for happiness. Because the Savage is talking about Shakespeare and talking about art and religion, and basically the World Controller is like, yeah, all that stuff is nice, but there's no place for any of that stuff in a stable society based on happiness. We've sacrificed all of that to give people universal happiness. People don't have to wonder anymore, they don't have to think, they don't have to desire, they don't have to work hard for things. And when we think about this and we compare that to present day, definitely what comes to my mind is consumerism. And is consumerism the same or opposite of truth and beauty? Because in a lot of ways you can think of truth and beauty as the human struggle, and is consumerism a manufactured form of human struggle in the sense of you want something, you have to work for it to obtain it, you know? So that's a whole nother question. But I believe the social conditioning that's done now through media platforms, which we could also call like a one world government, that's done to, you know, propagate this consumeristic ideal, is really quite similar to the propagandizing done by society in Brave New World through their conditioning centers and stuff. Obviously through the book it's much more intense in how society is structured. You know, the kids are growing up in factories, being conditioned from young ages, but in a lot of ways so are we. We just don't even need the factories, and we don't need the government control anymore because the phones and the social media platforms do it for us. So in a lot of ways you could say that, yeah, it's very similar, but it is much more, it's almost much more willing, because we're choosing to propagandize ourselves rather than having to have the government have us be raised in these kind of factories. So it's an interesting idea to ponder. In this book also there's a lot of genetic engineering going on, where there's different classes of humans being genetically engineered in different ways to optimize them for different types of jobs. For example, you have, you know, big brutish morons doing physical labor, and then you have these perfectly built alpha males doing intellectual, more white-collar work, and then everything, you know, from everything in between. So that's definitely something I see as being very far off from reality now, because what we see coming is robots are going to replace it, and I don't see any way in which we would need to have humans replacing it. There's also the concept of free love that's talked about in the Brave New World. And I think that's a really interesting idea too, and I was thinking a lot about that actually when I was reading it. And, you know, it's so interesting to think about the new world order, or the one world government as you can call it, which is prominent in this book. And a lot of people talk about a one world government and whatnot now. And then just to think about that as social media, and how social media has its fingers really in every young person's life all around the world, and how they can construct a narrative, and how this kind of like, you know, polyamorous or kind of, you know, free love movement is really definitely propped up through social media, and why that is. And in the book it's really interesting because basically it's like you can't have love and you can't have companionship, because then you have too strong of emotions, and strong emotions can lead to basically strong action. But we can't have people taking strong action, because then that leads to instability in society. And it's just a really interesting idea to put those things together and coincide those two. So we got that, Truth and Beauty, and then this idea of the 9-year war. Okay, that's the most significant point in Brave New World that I have yet to mention. So this society in the Brave New World was only possible through a 9-year war, basically. At the beginning of this 9-year war, the world government was beginning to have a grip on society, but there was still too much dissent, too much dissonance. So there was a war, and the war was to eradicate all of this opposition. And then after this 9-year war, they had the firm grip, and they could create whatever narrative they wanted, because all the opposition had been destroyed, and at this point they had a blank slate. Now I think that it's so important to think about this idea, because we say that we're so far away from having like all of this crazy control and all of this kind of, you know, genetically engineered humans, and like why we would never let the government do that. But imagine what could be achieved if we had a huge cultural reset like that. And just look at the events of 2020 and how those can give us a reference point to what can be achieved in terms of a societal shift and a cultural shift and a personal individual's view of themselves and their place in society, and how that can change monumentally within the scope of even 1 or 2 years, from just what they call a natural disaster, which is much different than a war. A war would be much more intense and much more devastating. So imagine, you know, what could happen after a 9-year war or a 9-year shift, and then use what happened in 2020 as a focal point or a reference for that, and then, you know, compare those ideas and contrast those ideas and turn that around in your mind a little bit. And I think we would see that we're actually not nearly as far from becoming exactly like that society as people would like to believe, because a lot can be obtained through a complete narrative shift like that. Anyway, I think that that's going to be my review of this book. The cultural significance alone is enough to read this book. I believe it is overhyped. I mean, there's plenty of good books out there, but still, to be able to sit in a circle of intellectuals and have a conversation about this book is worth your while, so I would check it out. That's my review of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like and subscribe, please. And yeah, peace out from Chiang Mai, Thailand. Thank you very much.